I understand that your introduction to Vietnamese art was through a Vietnam Investment Review article featuring the Gang of Five. What specifically captured your attention when you first encountered their work? And prior to your time in Vietnam, you were living in Tokyo. Were you actively involved in the art scene there? And if so, what sparked your interest in visiting Vietnam at that particular time?
I was peripherally involved in the art. I was just living my life in Tokyo, learning about the Japanese culture. Like I didn't have a gallery or wasn't actively working in fine arts. So after my husband died, I finally kind of came to life about 9 months after he died and really realized that I was living in the most expensive city in the world and everything was going to expire, like my visa and my work contract and my housing contract. So I went to Shanghai, Beijing, Bangkok, Hong Kong, Chiang Mai, kind of looking for some big passion to build my life around. Nothing was really happening. And then a friend of mine, in '93, she was a producer for CBS News in Tokyo. And she had been invited to be on Cathay Pacific's inaugural flight from Hong Kong to Saigon. She came to see me, and she brought this Vietnam Investment Review article. She knew I loved art, and my husband and I had collected. And so this was written in August 1993. It's written by Nora Taylor, a young Swiss woman who was studying at Cornell University in New York, the only institution in America that really knew anything about Vietnam. And they had a Southeast Asian art program. She had selected to write her thesis for her PhD on Vietnamese art. She came in about '92, and she became friends with the Gang of Five. I studied art in university. We didn't study anything about Vietnam because nobody knew anything about the culture of Vietnam. So at that time, I had no way of knowing that the French started the École des Beaux-Arts in 1925 in Hanoi. So when I saw these paintings, how extraordinary that this kind of artwork, very sophisticated. So I thought, that looks like Marc Chagall, and this looks like Matisse, and the work in the context of international art, because Asian motifs, but Western styling. You know, she talks about how the Gang of Five, you know, were just children during the Vietnam War. They suffered the deprivations of the war, but when they got out of art school in 1980, you know, they want to be integrated with the outside world. And it was really the first generation that could dare to dream about a better life. So all of a sudden the wars are over. They're not required to do propaganda work. This is a group of young artists, of course they're at least 12, 15 years younger than me, with this same mission of wanting to build a new life based on, you know, what's happening now and leaving the sorrow of the past behind. And also healing ourselves through the power of art. I found the passion that I was looking for. I'm going to go to Hanoi and I'm going to work with those artists. And so I came.
That's beautiful. How would you characterize the distinct artistic practices of each of the Gang of Five members?
Starting with Phạm Quang Vinh. This painting that he did, The Tree of Life, there's a sense of naivete in some ways, very imaginary, almost surrealistic in a way. It's very intimate to his feelings, and he did this in '93. He's discovering, of course, himself. He's in his early 30s when he painted this. The works of Hồng Việt Dũng, who's so different from all the other. Right. He's most known for his kind of dreamy landscapes, very romantic, soft. A bit like his character, you know, he's quite shy and gentle, so I think the works kind of portray his character.
He has more earthy tones.
Yeah, so the palette's quite different, very tranquil. He doesn't do works that agitate or, you know, it's all very pleasing. And Đặng Xuân Hòa, when I came to Vietnam in '94, so he was exhibiting in New York and then had a residency in Boston. His work was very intriguing because It's very European influenced, but very Vietnamese, like putting things upside down. And I immediately really liked his work because it's something, I suppose, all of them was the most relatable because it looks more Western to me. And then Trí Hiếu, I think, would be very singular in his approach. For me, he really represents the rural poetry of Vietnam. It's like a village boy. He's very gentle and soft, so his work reflects his character and this kind of naive styling that's very charming. Lương is the most different from all of the others. His early work started with these underwater creatures. The Gang of Five were all evacuated to the countryside during the war, so they can see the bombing. And of course they're separated from their families. It's very scary. So he sought solace in the rice paddies and the pools of water, and he would actually submerge himself. He'd see the eyes of the fish, and that became his world, underwater magic, where he felt safe. I don't know these stories, but I just see this somewhat European, but really unusual for me. He became the most active of the Gang of Five, doing all kinds of performance, curating, installations. Probably the most versatile.
For the retrospective exhibition, Gang of Five Changing Modern, you and Art Vietnam Gallery has generously loaned around 40 paintings. Having been so closely involved, what impact did you observe the exhibition having, and how do you envision the Gang of Five's legacy evolving over the next few decades?
The origin of that exhibition was probably in about, maybe even as early as 2010, 2012. And they only showed in Hanoi as the Gang of Five in 93, 94. After that, they never showed in Vietnam as the Gang of Five. They showed in London and Hong Kong, America, but not here in the country. So by 96, they've all gone their separate ways. I worked with them and sold their work and showed their work, but never as a collective group. So about in 2012, I remember I said to them, I said, I've been here over 20 years, and you're the reason I came here, and I have this amazing, wonderful life that I love. I would love to do an exhibition of your work, just as a way to show my gratitude for what you've done for me. They weren't that interested. Perhaps in about 2015, and maybe because of the curator, Lê Tuan Nguyen, who I worked with. She's just an amazing force, and she was working with Trần Lương at the time. And she knew about my desires. So we thought, okay, let's try this again. So we gathered all of the artists. My public gallery space was on Lý Quốc Sư. And then we looked at the space. I was going to have like a retrospective. I have about 80 works of art of the Gang of Five, and from other collectors. We all decided, Lý Quốc Sư space is really too small to show 5 artists. So we started looking at space, and that took a year, probably, or more. And we finally found the Vietnam Film Studio.
Yeah, on Thuy Quê Street.
Which was just the perfect venue. There were hundreds of bicycles everywhere and remnants of all these stage sets. Like there was a jail, there was a trolley car, cannons, and we left a lot of that and built the installation of the work kind of around those sets. While we were discussing all this, then the artists decided, we want to show new work. It's their show, and I just wanted to honor my friendship with them. So whatever they wanted, I was happy to do. For a lot of the Gang of Five's generation, Xuân Thuong, the art critic, and Nguyen Quan, and all these people that were so involved when Vietnam first opened up in the early 90s in the arts, they were so excited to be revisiting the film studio. When we had the opening, over 600 people came. It was a complete traffic jam on Thuy Quê Street. And I saw people that I hadn't seen for 25 years. They hadn't shown for so long. And so many young people, like young people your age, they didn't even know who the Gang of Five were. So it really revived. You know, they started to learn about the origins of contemporary art in Vietnam. In the north, they were the first to really break away from all that French-inspired work and do work that was truly more Vietnamese. Yes, I'd have to say that exhibition was one of the most thrilling, gratifying. We had a lot of collectors come, all from Europe, many museum directors. It was wonderful.
Was the Gang of Five formed by themselves or by another curator or critic?
Well, the Gang of Five were essentially just five friends. And Vin had a two-room house on Bui Thi Xuan. Vin would have like a salon in his living room. And they'd all hang paintings, and they would invite all these artists and writers and poets. They would critique the works, and they'd talk about art and life. And then in '93, Xuân Tung helped his daughter, Mai, set up the Mai Gallery. You know, Xuân Tung was a very well-known translator. He wrote about art, worked as an art critic. He and Nguyen Quan and the Gang of Five would meet very often at Xuân Tung's house. As the Gang of Five were all sitting on the floor with Xuân Tung, Nguyen Quan's there also. Somebody said, "Oh, you rascals," referring to the gang in China, Chiang Kai-shek, and the rebels who fled away from mainstream China. So that's how Gang of Five name came about, because they represented breaking away from the normalized life.
Are there any specific pieces by each of the artists that have been particularly meaningful to you or that have significantly shaped your understanding of their artistic contributions?
I'll start with Phạm Quang Vinh. I collected many of his paintings. But the Tree of Life was a lacquer that Vin did in '94. People heard about me as this American woman who knows a lot of artists, and you can contact her if you want to see art. So many foreigners would come to Hanoi, so I would spend my days taking them to different artist studios. So I was going back and forth and taking works of art abroad, selling them, and then coming back and also bringing materials and art books and music and things that were hard to get here at the time. I called my business the Tree of Life. Vietnam created for me this wonderful new life. It has a very special sentimental. Actually, when we finished building this house in '96, and as a surprise, Vin had brought an actual tree, and it was in the center of the space, and then he cut a square out of the branches, and then he put my computer monitor in the tree. So I was literally connected metaphorically and electronically to my Tree of Life. Okay, next artist, Trí Hiếu. And the minute I walked into Hugh's studio, I saw this big red painting. There was this kind of semi-abstract face of Buddha, an older woman to the side, like a countryside woman. She's not looking directly. It was like I was seeing myself, because it was like a woman waiting for somebody to come back. You know, my husband had only died a year before, and I was still longing, like when you lose someone you love so much. I can remember I would always just kind of pray for, if he could just come back for one day. That's all I ask of life. So that painting was everything. I would go to Hugh's studio many, many times, and of course that painting's always there. A taunting talisman. I would tell him every time I went how much I loved the painting. So I finally one day got up the courage to say to Hugh, if you ever decide one day that you do want to sell it, would you please remember that I love it so much? He laughed and he said, sure, okay. Several years went by. It could have been Christmas Day or the day before Christmas. He rang my doorbell and he brought that painting. And he said, okay, it's your turn. That was probably the most dramatic acquisition. So Hồng Việt Dũng, I have a few of his works. My favorite is The Village Tree. I would always see this kind of lone, solitary tree, usually a very big tree. I mean, they're in every village. The work is very different style than Hồng Việt Dũng. It's quite stark. The limbs are really angular, and it reminds me of Erich Heckel, the German expressionist, whose work I love. You know, it's strong and it's bold, and colors that kind of rich terracotta magenta, kind of at sundown. It reminds me of myself, how I was this solitary. I wasn't lonely, but I was very much alone. We can find peace and solitude in being solitary. I guess it's Trần Lương, right? So that series, he did a whole series of paintings at that time of these creatures. And the blue-black night was especially appealing because I could see kind of the softness and the mysteriousness of the black, dark night. And it also kind of symbolized finding the light in the darkness for me. And I think it was one of his first series when he really started to expose internationally. So for Đặng Xuân Hòa, yeah, this is a really fun, wonderful story for me. So I think in about 96, a group of Americans came to see me called World Team Sports. And the team is an acronym for The Exceptional Athlete Matters. So it was a group of athletes that would honor and support athletes who were physically challenged. So when they came to Vietnam, they had this incredible idea to do a bicycle ride from Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City, following, you know, Highway number 1. The purpose of this ride was how to promote reconciliation between Vietnam and America. The spirit of what they were doing was so powerful. I would love to propose something for you. I said, you know, Americans don't really know anything about the Vietnamese culture, and I work with all these wonderful artists. The night before you take off on your ride, I'd like to do an art exhibition and show the art that's coming out of Vietnam today. And then I'll publish a book about your ride and the mission that you're doing, you know. And they immediately said, oh, sure, yeah, that'd be great. And then I don't hear anything for 2 years. Of course, I'm living my life and working, and I had just been in the States doing an exhibition. I come back in December 1st, 1997, and I get this call from World Team Sports. And they say, okay, Suzanne, we're coming. And of course, I'm so excited, but I thought the idea was always to start the ride on the first day of the year. So it was going to start January 1st, 1998. So I had literally like 3 weeks to put together an exhibition and publish a book. Anyway, I did it. Phạm Quang Vinh helped me publish the book. You know, it was such a huge amount of work. I mean, we got almost no sleep. And I went on the ride, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. It was just transformative. Yeah, that's a long segue into, I get the phone call, okay, the ride's on. I went to Đặng Xuân Hòa studio. I walk in, and it's like destiny, I think. I see this huge painting. There's a little man sitting on a brick. There's this big sun, big swath of red paint, and there's a bicycle pump, and there's a bicycle. I asked Hòa, what is that you're feeling about this painting? But he said, you know, every morning when I go out to get my morning bowl of pho, I see this same man, just hoping to make a few dong. I think it was like 2,000 dong at that time to get your tires pumped. And he's always happy. He's there, rain or shine. This is perfect. Each day is a promise of something better. The sun is rising, you know, symbolizing the hope and the start. And I decided I would call it A New Morning. I've got the title for the book.
So the exhibition is also called A New Morning?
Yeah, we had it at the Fine Arts University at Yet Q. And Madam Hung, Giang Hung, who's an artist, she was the director of the Fine Arts Association at the time and my sponsor, so she helped me to organize it. Everybody from the Gang of Five had a painting in the exhibition, but it was also Bùi Hu Hung and Tan Chung and other artists. And it was just a symbol of the friendship between America and Vietnam, and starting a new way of reuniting people that had been separated.